Well, okay, so thanks, Ben. First of all, I had never heard that the work read before, or I hadn't even read it, and I have to say personally, I think it's really working. So we've been best friends since we were 13, and we talk a lot, but I'd never heard it before. That's really great. It's amazing because we do. Ben's a writer, and I'm a filmmaker. We work in different mediums, but I think ever since we started working on the website together and doing this kind of work, we've had kindred souls in this pursuit. And what I'm going to talk about right now is similar issues in discontinuity and contiguity of these meetings where you don't quite touch, but you come very close, but in visual culture and in cultural evolution. And I will show a little clip from my most recent film at the end. But first, I want to talk just a little bit about the approach that I take to these issues, especially neuroaesthetics, which I mentioned before, which many of you probably have heard before. This is a field that probes what goes on in the brain during aesthetic experience. Could be of literature, but usually in neuroaesthetics we're talking about painting and visual culture. And I became very interested in that field, but I more and more came to be a bit skeptical, just because I felt like we were arriving on the brain all the time with these articles you read or pop science books as an end domain, as an answer to explain something, when maybe the science isn't quite ready yet to be treated as an end domain. So just to codify that approach a bit, I like to call this the Apollo 13 theory of neuroaesthetics. And the idea here is that you want to probe culture, and you want to look at the brain for answers to culture. You want to see what happens in the brain when you look at a painting or watch a movie or read a book. But instead of being able to land on the brain for an answer and say, this area lights up, you probably see articles with these beautiful images of brains with an fMRI scan, and we're thinking that we're providing an answer when we say this X area lights up when we do X. But maybe we can't really treat that as an end domain yet, as an answer to the question. So I think it's more useful, instead of thinking we can land on the brain for an answer in any one region, to do what Apollo 13 did, which was to use the brain to gain velocity in our conversation, and to get really close to it, but crucially to swing around it, and to remember that we need to land back on the art and the culture if we're going to really talk about it. So we need to incorporate anthropology or sociology or other disciplines just in the same kind of slingshot effect as we would with the brain. So the idea here is we can use the brain as a lens on the culture, but we can't think that we're gaining something by landing on it. So what I'm going to talk about today involves this, but before we get there, I want to give an example of something that could happen from landing on the brain too clearly for an answer, which has been an urban legend for I think too long, which I think is fading away now, but just to remind people this idea that we have this clean hemispherical separation, and that creative people are left brain, analytical people are, sorry, the other way around, creative people are right brain, analytical people are left brain, is proven to be false over and over again, that clean distinction, even though there is lateral functional differences between the hemispheres. This is the kind of overgeneralization I'm talking about, where we go surface level with what neuroscience is telling us, and we think that it's going to explain something about creativity and the mind. So what I prefer to do, and as an introduction to this talk, is to think of what the brain is actually telling us, to look at the formal properties of the brain, and to think about when we look at any kind of scientific paper, what are the actual principles there, and not only from new science coming out, but in the history of science. So Ben talks about the discontinuity of the nervous system at a basic level. That's one, but I think there's all of these properties could be taken, each of them, as a lens to look back at culture through. And these are, I just put up a few of my favorite examples, but these are all principles of the way the nervous system is organized and functions that science has repeatedly shown, and that I think are nice philosophical tenets to couch any discussion on. And I'll give an example of my own work. Recently, I tried to explore some of these issues. This was a piece for Times Square back in November called Brain City, and there were three aspects of the project. The first one was just to create a 3-minute video that was using imagery from the latest neuroscientific, some of the latest imagery from neuroscientific projects around the world, to do a 3-minute video that played every night at midnight in Times Square that was basically a journey through these beautiful image of the brain, which can be oversold in the pop science media, but in this case, the idea was just to explode them in terms of scale. But what I think more connects to tonight's theme is another aspect of this project, which was to design banners that went around Times Square that are still up there now, which tried to create this connection between inner worlds and outer worlds. And that was the whole idea with this project, Brain City. This was from a paper by Van Wedeen at Harvard. He traced pathways in the brain and found a strangely grid-like pattern to fiber pathways in the brain. So this is a real scientific image. But crucially, they were only, the grid-like pattern was in the neocortex, or the most recently evolved parts of the brain. Now, I liked how that lined up with like a historical map of New York City, where the newer neighborhoods have a really clear grid-like structure. The older neighborhoods are a bit messier. So this introduces really what I want to talk about tonight, which is this idea of the messiness of evolution and the way that cultures and the brain appropriate structures from the past for new uses in the present. This is just an image of, these are still in Times Square, if you know anybody in that area. So I've been interested in that, not just with images that we can create now by looking at the world around us, but if we turn back on art history and we explore, and that's what I've personally been interested in. I was figuring out how to connect neuroscience and art history to find that contiguity between the two disciplines. I've been interested in sites like, for example, the Dome of the Rock, which has this layered significance in the sense that it's built on the Temple Mount, which was the site of the Jewish Second Temple, which was demolished by the Romans. And then when Muslims arrived in the 7th century and they built the Dome of the Rock, there's a stone within the walls of the temple which gives it its significance. This is the foundation stone, which for different cultures means very different things. For Jews, it's the site where Abraham prepared his sacrifice, and for Muslims, it's the site of Muhammad's ascension. And it's, the materiality of the site is, to begin with, layered, but for different cultures, it's a process of taking elements of the past and bringing them into the present to assert authority and legitimacy and to assert a continuous appearance, when in reality, when you begin to destruct the materiality of the site, what's beneath it is deep discontinuity. So another site that I think shares something with the Dome of the Rock is the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which I've never been to personally, but only virtually in the Google image zone. This site is interesting because it was first a Visigoth church that was then demolished when Muslims arrived, and then the mosque was built. And it was built in this very peculiar new style that was nowhere around the world at the moment, which maybe some of you have seen, which is alternating red and white arches. And it was double height, which was never in any mosque before this one. And it's like, okay, where did this come from? It was an innovation. And in the countryside around the mosque, we find these Roman aqueducts. So there's a sense of appropriation to assert legitimacy and make this double high mosque. We appropriate structures from the past to assert authority in the present. Now, the story of the Great Mosque of Cordoba then takes this other turn in the 12th century when Charles V plops down a cathedral right in the middle of the mosque, which is incredible because it's physically right there, but it's touching right up against the rest of the structure, as if to say, now we're here. We could have built in any other part of the neighborhood, but we're going to take this site. So, to me, and this is stretching a little bit, but the way I like to think about the evolution of a visual tradition like this, where here we have images of the mosque as it's been expanded several times, starting from the 7th century onward, and then we see the cathedral get plopped down in the middle there. But to me, I've always found an interesting parallel in the messiness of this kind of visual evolution of cultures to the actual evolution of the brain. In the sense that this is a nice diagram because it shows you with these cross-hatching and solid blocks the same structures that have been manipulated by evolutionary forces for different animals, different species over time. So there's not as, it's as if, we want to think there's this nice linear story of evolution that's arrived at this mammalian brain, but in reality, things are much messier than that, much more discontinuous than that. Sites are reappropriated, used for different purposes, and expanded when needed and contracted when not. So to now zoom out and deeper in space a little bit, I think in my own recent work, and to get to the clip I want to play, I've now been thinking about this a little more in terms of the environment and the way in which our current, the continuity of our current world is sustained by, well, hopefully not for much longer, but is currently still sustained by digging very deep, fracturing the past, and appropriating something out of it to heat our homes with. So my new film, which is called Deep Time, I think I have, yeah, here we go. Okay, so hits on this issue of the discontinuity in environmental appropriation a little bit, just in the sense that the culture on the surface, which is really what my film is about, is dealing with what the change wrought from drilling so deep, from fracturing, from this idea that we want to think we're living on this solid whole Earth, but in reality, again, we have layers that each signify cataclysms in geological time, where whole eons of living creatures were solidified and then we take them back out again. So in this clip, what you're going to see, well, it comes in a place in the film. The film deals a lot with Native Americans in North Dakota who are dealing with fossil fuel extraction and are dealing with a loss of their own culture and their own language as a result of the urban sprawl and the man camps that have come and the change in the environment around them. So I'll play the clip to finish. This is from my new film, Deep Time. It's just about three and a half minutes long. Thank you.